Hello everyone, my name is David and I am with Sahit once again to discuss Unit 4 Conditioning Behavior.
One thing that many pet owners can relate to is teaching your pet to understand and comprehend new tricks. But how exactly does it work? Every pet and every pet owner are uniquely different, and therefore, there are numerous ways to instruct. But how does this process of teaching new tricks look from a psychologist's perspective? In psychology, learning is categorized into two types: associative and cognitive. Associative is the process of linking two events that occur together, which is broken down into two another groups: classical and operant conditioning. Cognitive, on the other hand, is more observational. Furthermore, to describe each particular process, we use acronyms. While the definitions of these acronyms in the abstract are quite confusing, by providing examples, we will easily make them understandable and more comprehensible and rememberable. In this unit, the term stimulus will frequently be mentioned. By definition, a stimulus is any external event or situation that evokes a response. For example, if you're hungry, you eat some food, and if you're cold, you put on a jacket. The hunger and the cold act as stimuli that evoke a response from you. From the diagram, we will discuss the stimuli and responses along with their relationships to one another.
The unconditioned stimulus, US for short, is a stimulus that is unlearned and that naturally automatically triggers a UR. The unconditioned response, shortened to UR, is the unlearned, naturally recurring response to the US. The neutral stimuli, or NS for short, is essentially by itself. It does not create a response unlike the conditioned and unconditioned stimuli. The appropriate definition of the neutral stimuli is a stimulus that elicits no response before conditioning. It creates no response by itself. However, when the US or unconditioned stimulus is connected with the NS, it becomes a conditioned stimulus. The conditioned stimulus, originally an NS, that after association with the US comes to trigger the CR. In addition, the conditioned response, or CR, is the learned response to a previously neutral stimulus, or NS, that is now the CS.
Since we've just covered a lot of information, I will now present some examples that will help you understand the concept a little better. One famous experiment, called the Pavlov's dog, encompasses all these terms. Essentially, in the experiment, Russian psychologist Ivan Pavlov demonstrated classical conditioning by enabling his dog to drool at the ring of a bell. To accomplish this feat, Pavlov relied on the dog's natural instincts of drooling at the sight of food, an unconditioned stimulus, in response. Afterwards, during each meal, he would ring a bell, and over time the dog was able to associate the sound of a bell with food, thus making it drool. So let's break this down. In this case, the food was the unconditioned stimulus, which evoked an unconditioned response, the drooling, which is a natural response for dogs. Then, in the conditioning process, the neutral stimulus, or the bell, was introduced along with the food. This resulted in the default unconditioned response, drooling. But here's where the conditioning clicks in. Since the bell was present alongside with the food, the dog began associating the bell with food. Thus, the bell, which was the neutral stimulus, became a conditioned stimulus, evoking the conditioned response, which is drooling. This classical conditioning, and it quite frankly works with both animals and humans, although it's quite harder with humans due to our more complex cognitive abilities and processes. For a more in-depth and elaborate demonstration of the experiment, we will provide a link of a video of Pavlov's dog's experiment in the description of this video.
Unlike the previous example, Watson's experiment on little Albert was a demonstration of classical conditioning on humans. John B. Watson initially presented little Albert with a white rat that evoked no response out of the little child. However, after presenting the rat with a loud bang, the rat being the neutral stimulus creating no response and the loud noise being the unconditioned stimulus, little Albert was startled and ended up being scared of the rat. Similarly to the previous slide, we will also be attaching a link to a visual demonstration of Watson's experiment in the description of this video.
In the world of psychology, there are 5 major conditioning processes: acquisition, extinction, spontaneous recovery, generalization, and discrimination. Acquisition is when the neutral stimulus is paired with the unconditioned stimulus to become the conditioned stimulus. In our previous Pavlov example, the neutral stimulus, the bell, was paired with the unconditioned stimulus, the food, which together became the conditioned stimulus involving simply just a bell?
Extinction is when the conditioned response either stops or decreases when the conditioned stimulus is repeatedly presented alone. An example of extinction from the Pavlov's dog experiment is the presentation of the conditioned stimulus, the bell, over and over, but without the unconditioned stimulus, the food. Spontaneous recovery is the reappearance of an extinguished conditioned response. To demonstrate spontaneous recovery, in correlation to Pavlov's dog experiment, the sound of a tone was repeatedly paired with the presentation of food. Eventually, the sound of the bell alone led the dogs to salivate.
The tendency to respond to stimuli similar to this conditioned stimulus is generalization. An example of Pavlov's dog, although the dog was conditioned to respond to the sound of a bell, it might respond instead to the sound of a whistle or to the sound of a tuning fork. As long as it's similar enough, the dog would generalize it and assume that the bell can be replaced with a tuning fork or a whistle. This is generalization. And on the opposite spectrum of generalization, we have discrimination, which involves the ability to distinguish between a conditioned stimulus and some other irrelevant stimulus. So, although the dog may be generalized and view a whistle like a bell, it would not result in drooling if it heard the horn of a car or the shouting of a man or any other sound. It needs to be similar enough to be generalized, but if the stimulus is too different, it will start discriminating, understanding that these two are different, and won't combine them. If your pet, for example, a dog, is barking for attention, how do you respond? Do you yell at him to stop? Well, guess what? You just gave him what he wanted. Or if he steals a hot dog roll off the counter, do you yell at him, then watch defeated as he eats it? Again, you're letting him know that his bad behavior has paid off. Think about what your dog is trying to accomplish when he's misbehaving, and don't allow him to be rewarded for it. Instead, give him or her an opportunity to succeed. For example, telling the begging dog to go to his place and lie down and give him a treat when he does. This is a demonstration of reinforcement, probably explained by operant conditioning.
Behavior is strengthened if followed by a reinforcer and diminished if followed by a punishment. A key conception is that behavior is not respondent but operant. Essentially, behavior is not naturally occurring but operates on the environment to produce reward or punishment, such as a consequence. We will discuss more about learning association between behavior and its resulting events versus events it can't control. B.F. Skinner, who is on the left, was a behaviorist who was heavily influenced by Thorndike's work, who is on the right. In his experiments, Skinner used pigeons. His major contribution to psychology was Skinner's boxes, enclosed apparatus that contains a bar or key that animal can press or manipulate to obtain food or water as a type of reinforcement. Similarly, Thorndike utilized puzzle boxes and other contraptions to either reinforce or reward. Instead of pigeons, Thorndike used cats. Thorndike discovered and developed the law of effect. Reward behavior is likely to reoccur. Conversely, behavior followed by punishment or consequence is less likely to occur. The first two categories of reinforcement is broken down between positive and negative. For positive reinforcement, a person will be presenting a typical pleasurable stimulus, such as rewarding the subject on what they like. On the other hand, for negative reinforcement, it is not what it seems or sounds like, where usually people mistakenly associate negative reinforcement with something bad like a punishment. Negative reinforcement is instead the reducing or removing adverse stimuli, taking away something that the subject doesn't like. Essentially, both positive and negative reinforcement strengthens response or increase the frequency of a preceding response or behavior.
The second category of reinforcers consists of primary and secondary. Primary reinforcement serves a biological purpose, innately satisfies a biological need such as food, or praise, or water, or shelter. In contrast, secondary or conditioned is learned because it's associated with a primary reinforcer, like money, which we can associate with food and housing and survival, or grades, which we can associate with praise and success and general happier future. A schedule of reinforcement is basically a rule stating which instances of behavior will be reinforced. In some cases, a behavior might be reinforced every single time it occurs. Sometimes a behavior might not be reinforced at all. There are 6 of these rules, all of which can easily be memorized by breaking down to their roots. Fixed is set or known. Variable is opposite, being unpredictable and unknown. Furthermore, separately, there is ratio, the amount of responses, and interval, which stands for time.
Now understand the definition of those root words, we can now decipher which reinforcement rule is what. For the slope in red, it is variable ratio, where the responses are reinforced after a unpredictable or unknown number of behaviors, such as gambling. In the blue is fixed ratio, reinforced after a known or set number of behaviors, such as working out and 15 burpees equals 1 minute of break. The green illustrates variable interval, where there is an unpredictable or unknown amount of time that has to pass before being reinforced. Lastly, in yellow is fixed interval, the set amount of time that has to pass before being reinforced, such as monthly paychecks. We also have two other terms that were not previously mentioned and not in the diagram. They are continuous and partial, both of which are somewhat self-explanatory. Continuous is reinforced every time the behavior is being done, while partial is only part of the time. Have you ever rode in the same car with your parents or guardian? Usually they might go over the speeding limit or text and drive, which are all against the law. However, once a cop car is apparent or present, have you noticed that they tend to go stiff and drive a bit slower and perhaps put that device away? This is the perfect example of punishment, a decreased behavior knowing that the police can hand out speeding tickets and report you to the law.
Unlike what we previously mentioned with the positive and negative reinforcements, positive and negative punishment are rested in decreasing a behavior. This might be in the form of administering adverse stimuli, like threatening a student with summer school so that they don't skip school, or to withdraw a rewarding stimulus, like taking away a person's phone or some other sort of enjoyment. If you have a sibling, have you ever witnessed your sibling being punished for taking something like a cookie without asking, and then you tend not to take cookies without permission in the future? Or let's say you're into video games. Have you ever gone on YouTube or some other platform and watched your favorite streamers or players build insane buildings, and so you tried those techniques in your own matches and survival settings? These are all examples of observational learning.
In contrast to classical and operant conditioning, observational learning is more simplistic. It is simply the learning that occurs through observation. A more detailed illustration can be provided by the Bobo beatdown study. A link to the video will also be posted in this video's description. Thank you very much for watching through this presentation of fundamental behavior conditioning, a preview into the broad field of behavioral psychology. We hope you found this enjoyable and educational. Have a great day.